Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Bonechill. Before we dive in, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. You won't want to miss what's coming. Also, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And is it dark outside yet?
Do you remember the smell of campfire smoke clinging to your clothes? The sound of laughter echoing across a moonlit lake? For most of us, summer camp represents innocence, a time when our biggest worry was whether we'd make it through Capture the Flag without getting poison ivy. Those memories feel safe, wrapped in nostalgia like a favorite childhood blanket. But what happens when those sacred memories become tainted? When the places that were supposed to protect us, nurture us, become the source of our deepest fears? I've spent years collecting stories from former campers, counselors, and camp directors. Stories that were whispered around dying embers long after lights out. Stories that were buried, forgotten, dismissed as the overactive imaginations of homesick children. But I've learned something disturbing. Some childhood experiences leave scars that never fade, and some summer camps harbor secrets that go far beyond pranks and ghost stories. These 4 accounts came to me through different channels: anonymous, emails, handwritten letters, desperate phone calls in the middle of the night. Each one verified, each one documented, each one more disturbing than the last. They all share one common thread: seemingly innocent objects that became conduits for something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Before we begin this journey into the darker side of childhood memories, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button and subscribe to help Dr. Bonechill reach 10,000 subscribers. Your support means everything to this channel, and please share your own summer camp experiences in the comments below. Sometimes sharing these memories is the only way to make sense of them. Now let me tell you about 4 summers that changed everything. 4 camps where childhood innocence went to die. My name is Marcus, and I need to tell you about the summer I turned 13. The summer I learned that some friendships demand more than you're willing to give. It was 2019, and my parents had enrolled me in Camp Wildwood, a sleepaway camp nestled in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. I wasn't thrilled about being away from home for 6 weeks, but my parents insisted it would be good for me. Help me make friends, build confidence, all the usual parental platitudes. I was a quiet kid, more comfortable with books than people, and the idea of forced socialization in the wilderness filled me with dread. The camp itself was exactly what you'd picture from those old movies: rustic cabins scattered around a pristine lake, a massive lodge with a stone fireplace, hiking trails disappearing into thick pine forests. It had been operating since the 1950s, with that weathered, lived-in feel that parents love and kids find either charming or creepy. I fell into the latter category. My cabin was called Wolverine, and I shared it with 7 other boys and our counselor, Jake, a college sophomore who tried too hard to be the cool older brother. The other kids seemed to pair off immediately, finding their tribes based on shared interests or complementary personalities. I remained on the periphery, politely declining invitations to join their conversations, content to observe from my bottom bunk. That changed on the 3rd day, during arts and crafts. The activity director, a perpetually cheerful woman named Counselor Beth, had set up stations around the lodge for various projects. Most of the kids gravitated toward the wood carving or painting stations, but I found myself drawn to a quiet corner where an older girl was demonstrating how to make friendship bracelets. She looked to be maybe 16, with long auburn hair, and the kind of pale, freckled complexion that suggested she spent more time indoors than most camp counselors. "I'm Sarah," she said when I approached her table, her voice soft and somehow familiar, though I was certain we'd never met. "I'm a CIT, counselor in training. Are you interested in learning to make bracelets?" I nodded, drawn by her gentle demeanor and the intricate patterns of thread spread across her workspace. She had dozens of completed bracelets hanging from a wooden rack, complex geometric designs in colors that seemed to shift subtly in the lodge's dim lighting. "These are beautiful," I said, reaching toward one particularly striking bracelet woven in deep purples and midnight blues. "Don't touch that one," Sarah said quickly, her hand shooting out to stop me. For just a moment, her fingers felt ice cold against my wrist. That one's special. Not for giving away. She guided me to a simpler pattern instead, alternating strands of red and black thread. As she showed me the basic knotting technique, she spoke in a low, almost hypnotic voice about the history of friendship bracelets. Native Americans believe that when you tie threads together with intention, you're binding more than just fibers, she explained, her fingers working the threads with practiced efficiency. You're connecting spirits, creating bonds that transcend the physical world. Some tribes thought certain patterns could trap souls, hold them close even when the body was far away. I laughed nervously. That's just superstition, right? Sarah's green eyes met mine, and for a moment they seemed much older than her teenage face. Is it? Haven't you ever felt connected to someone in a way you couldn't explain? Like they understood you on a level that went beyond words? I had to admit, I was feeling exactly that with her. Despite having just met, I felt more comfortable talking to Sarah than I had with anyone in years. It was as if she could see past my awkward exterior to something worthwhile underneath. Over the next hour, she taught me to weave my first friendship bracelet. My fingers were clumsy at first, but under her patient guidance a pattern began to emerge. The repetitive motion was soothing, almost meditative, and I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone. My fear of not fitting in, my parents' recent arguments, my deep-seated worry that there was something fundamentally wrong with me that made it hard for people to like me. Sarah listened without judgment, offering gentle encouragement and occasionally guiding my hands when I made a mistake. When the bracelet was finished, a simple but neat pattern of red and black, she smiled with what seemed like genuine pride. "This is really good for a first attempt," she said, holding it up to catch the light. "You have natural talent. Who are you going to give it to?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about having someone to give it to. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll just keep it. "Oh no," Sarah said, shaking her head. "Friendship bracelets only work when they're given away. The magic is in the sharing, the connection between two people. You have to find someone special to receive this." I looked around the lodge at my fellow campers, none of whom had shown much interest in befriending the quiet new kid. "What if I don't have anyone to give it to?" Sarah's expression softened with something that looked like sympathy. "Everyone has someone, Marcus. Sometimes we just have to look harder to find them. But when you do find that person, this bracelet will create a bond between you that can't be broken." The way she said it sent a small chill through me, but I attributed it to the lodge's perpetual dampness and the gathering storm clouds outside. That evening, back in Wolverine Cabin, I lay on my bunk turning the bracelet over in my hands. The other boys were engaged in their usual pre-bedtime ritual of ghost stories and crude jokes, but I found myself thinking about Sarah's words. Who could I give this to? Who would want a token of friendship from someone like me? The answer came the next morning, in the form of Tyler Chen, a boy from the neighboring cabin who'd been watching me with curious eyes since my arrival. Tyler was small for his age, with thick glasses and an enthusiasm for everything camp-related that had made him a target for the more cynical kids. During breakfast, he approached my table with a shy smile. "Hey, Marcus, right? I saw you working on something in arts and crafts yesterday. Was it a friendship bracelet?" I nodded, surprised that anyone had noticed. "That's so cool," Tyler continued, his eyes lighting up. "I've always wanted to learn how to make those. My sister made one for me before I left for camp, but I left it at home by accident. I miss having something that reminds me of, friendship." The vulnerability in his voice reminded me of myself, and I made a decision that would haunt me for years to come. "Actually," I said, reaching into my pocket, "I made one yesterday. Would you like to have it?" Tyler's face transformed, with genuine joy as I handed him the red and black bracelet. He immediately tied it around his wrist, admiring the pattern with an intensity that made my chest warm with pride. "This is amazing," he said. "Thank you, Marcus. Really. I'll treasure it." For the first time since arriving at camp, I felt like I'd done something right. Tyler and I spent the rest of breakfast talking about books and movies, discovering a shared love of science fiction and a mutual dislike of competitive sports. It felt natural, easy in a way that social interactions rarely did for me. Over the next few days, Tyler and I became inseparable. We partnered up for hiking expeditions, sat together during campfire stories, and snuck out after lights out to stargaze by the lake. The friendship bracelet never left his wrist, and he had a habit of absently touching it when he talked, as if drawing comfort from its presence. But as our friendship deepened, I began to notice something unsettling. Tyler seemed to be losing weight. Despite the camp's hearty meals and constant physical activity, dark circles appeared under his eyes, and he often seemed distracted, as if listening to something only he could hear. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked one evening as we sat on the dock, our feet dangling in the cool lake water. "You've seemed different lately." Tyler turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I feel more connected to you than I've ever felt to anyone, like we're meant to be friends forever." The intensity in his voice made me uncomfortable. "Well, yeah, I like being friends too, but..." "No," he interrupted, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "You don't understand. This isn't just friendship. This is something deeper, something permanent." He held up his wrist, showing me the bracelet. In the moonlight, the red and black threads seemed to pulse with their own rhythm like a heartbeat. "Ever since you gave me this, I've been having the most vivid dreams. Dreams where we're together always, where nothing can separate us, where we share everything, thoughts, feelings, even memories." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. "Tyler, that's not normal. Maybe you should talk to the camp nurse." His grip tightened, and for a moment his eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's. "Why would I want to change something so perfect? Don't you feel it too, Marcus? The connection? The way we're becoming more than just friends?" I tried to pull away, but his fingers were like iron bands around my arm. "Tyler, you're scaring me. Let go." He released me immediately, his expression shifting to one of confused hurt. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just feel so close to you. Like we're two parts of the same person." That night I lay awake in my bunk, replaying Tyler's words and the strange intensity in his eyes. I thought about Sarah's explanation of the bracelets, how they were supposed to create unbreakable bonds between people. At the time, it had sounded like harmless folklore. Now it felt like a warning I'd failed to heed. The next morning, Tyler wasn't at breakfast. Counselor Jake mentioned that he'd reported feeling sick and was spending the day in the infirmary. I tried to visit him, but the nurse said he was sleeping and shouldn't be disturbed. I didn't see Tyler for 3 days. When he finally emerged from the infirmary, the change in him was dramatic. He'd lost at least 10 pounds, his skin had taken, on a grayish pallor, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone much older. But worst of all were his eyes. They held a hungry, desperate quality that made my stomach churn. "Marcus," he said when he spotted me across the dining hall, his voice carrying an odd echo. "I've missed you so much. We need to talk." He approached my table, and I noticed that several other campers instinctively moved away from him. There was something wrong with Tyler now, something that triggered a primal unease in everyone around him. "Are you feeling better?" I asked, though it was obvious. He wasn't. "I'm feeling different," he said, sitting down across from me. Up close I could see that the friendship bracelet had changed too. The red and black threads now appeared to be moving, writhing like tiny snakes around his wrist. "The dreams have gotten stronger, more real. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm Tyler or if I'm you. Sometimes I think we're becoming the same person. Tyler, this isn't healthy. Maybe we should tell someone." "No." His voice was sharp enough to draw stares from nearby tables. He immediately lowered it, leaning closer. "You can't tell anyone. They wouldn't understand what we have. They'd try to separate us, and that would destroy everything." He held up his wrist again, and I saw that the bracelet had somehow grown tighter, pressing into his skin and leaving deep red marks. "Don't you see? This is what friendship really means, true connection. I'm becoming part of you, Marcus, and you're becoming part of me. We'll never be alone again. Terror flooded through me as I realized what was happening. Somehow the bracelet wasn't just symbolizing our friendship. It was literally binding us together. Tyler was being consumed by it, drained to feed some impossible connection that I'd unknowingly created. I stood up abruptly, backing away from the table. I have to. Oh, this is crazy, Tyler. You need help. His face crumpled with anguish. Please don't leave me, Marcus. I can't exist without you anymore. The bracelet won't let me. I ran from the dining hall, my mind racing. I needed to find Sarah, to understand what I'd done and how to undo it. But when I reached the Arts and Crafts Lodge, the activity director told me something that made my blood run cold. Sarah? I'm sorry, but we don't have a CIT named Sarah. We only have 2 counselors in training this summer, and neither of them is named Sarah. But I met her, I insisted. She taught me to make the friendship bracelet. Auburn hair, pale skin, about 16 years old. The director shook her head sympathetically. I think you might be confused, dear. Are you feeling all right? You look quite pale. I spent the rest of the day searching for Sarah, asking every counselor and staff member I could find. None of them knew who I was talking about. According to everyone at Camp Wildwood, the girl who had taught me to make the bracelet simply didn't exist. That night, Tyler didn't return to his cabin. A search party was organized, and they found him at dawn, sitting by the lake with his feet in the water. He was unconscious, barely breathing, and the friendship bracelet had somehow fused with his skin, the threads now part of his flesh. He was rushed to the nearest hospital, and I never saw him again. The official story was that he'd suffered some kind of severe allergic reaction, possibly to poison ivy or an insect bite. His parents took him home, and camp administration assured us that he was recovering well. But I knew the truth. The bracelet was slowly consuming him, draining his life force to maintain whatever supernatural connection I'd unknowingly forged. And I was responsible. The worst part came 3 weeks later, on my last night at camp. I was lying in my bunk, trying to fall asleep when I felt something wrap around my wrist. I looked down to see threads of red and black materializing around my arm, weaving themselves into the same pattern I'd created for Tyler. As the bracelet completed itself, I felt a presence in my mind, Tyler's thoughts mixing with my own. His voice, weak and distant, whispered in my head, "Now we'll be together forever, Marcus, just like you promised." I tried to remove the bracelet, but it was part of me now, fused with my skin just as it had been with Tyler's. And through it, I could feel him, his hunger, his need, his desperate love that had become something monstrous. That was 15 years ago. The bracelet never left my wrist, hidden now under long sleeves and careful positioning. Tyler's presence in my mind has grown stronger over time, more insistent. Sometimes I catch glimpses of him in mirrors, standing behind me with that same desperate smile. Sometimes I wake up to find notes written in my own handwriting, but in his voice, begging me to join him completely. I've tried everything. Doctors, therapists, even religious leaders. But no one can see the bracelet anymore. It's invisible, to everyone but me. An invisible chain that binds me to a friendship that should have ended decades ago. And sometimes late at night when the boundary between waking and sleeping grows thin, I wonder if Sarah was real at all. Or if she was something else, something that feeds on the connections between people, that uses love and friendship as bait to create bonds that transcend death itself. The friendship bracelet still pulses against my wrist as I tell you this story, keeping time with a heartbeat that isn't entirely my own. And Tyler's voice whispers in my mind, patient and eternal. Soon, Marcus, soon we'll be together forever. Some friendships, I've learned, are meant to last forever, whether you want them to or not. My name is David, and I need to tell you about the summer I learned that some memories are better left buried. It was the summer of 2016, and I was 14 years old when my parents shipped me off to Camp Sunrise in the mountains of North Carolina. They'd been fighting more than usual that year, hushed arguments behind closed doors that would fall silent whenever I entered the room. The camp brochure promised character-building adventures and lifelong memories, but I knew it was really just a way for them to have their marital crisis without an awkward teenager witnessing every moment. Camp Sunrise was one of those old-fashioned places that prided itself on tradition. The cabins were authentic log structures from the 1940s, complete with creaky floorboards and windows that never quite closed properly. The camp director, a weathered man named Mr. Harrison, gave us a speech on arrival day about how some of the greatest men in America had spent their formative summers in these very cabins, learning the values that built character and shaped destinies. I was assigned to Cabin 7, which I shared with 5 other boys, and our counselor, Chad, a college junior, who seemed more interested in his summer reading than supervising a bunch of teenagers. The other boys were typical camp archetypes: the jock, the comedian, the rich kid, the nature enthusiast, and the quiet one who spent most of his time sketching in a notebook. I fell somewhere in between, trying to find my place in the established social dynamics. On our second day, during the traditional cabin cleanup, I discovered something wedged behind my bottom bunk. It was a small wooden box, maybe 6 inches square, with intricate carvings covering every surface. The wood was dark with age, and the carvings depicted scenes of camp life: canoes on a lake, figures around a campfire, children playing games in a forest clearing. At first glance, it looked like the kind of souvenir you might buy in the camp store, but when I lifted it, the box felt heavier than it should have, and the wood was warm to the touch despite having been hidden in the shadows. There was no visible way to open it, no hinges, no latch, no seam where a lid might separate from the base. It appeared to be carved from a single piece of wood. "Hey, what's that?" asked Tommy, the jock from the bunk above mine. He dropped down to examine the box, turning it over in his hands. "Weird. Looks old. Maybe it's worth something." The other boys gathered around, each taking a turn examining the mysterious box. Kyle, the one who was always sketching, seemed particularly fascinated by the carvings. "These scenes," he said, tracing them with his finger. "They're incredibly detailed. Look at this one. You can see individual faces around the campfire. And this canoe scene, I swear the expressions on these kids' faces change depending on how you look at them." He was right. The carved figures seemed to shift subtly as you viewed them from different angles, their expressions moving from joy to concern to something that might have been fear. "It's probably just a trick of the light," said Marcus, the rich kid, though he sounded uncertain. "Old wood can play tricks on your eyes." Chad barely glanced up from his book. "Probably belonged to a previous camper. Just leave it on the shelf. Or something. We need to finish cleaning before inspection." But I found myself drawn to the box throughout the day. During rest hour, while the others napped or wrote letters home, I sat on my bunk studying the intricate carvings. The more I looked, the more details I noticed. Tiny faces hidden in the background of scenes. Symbols carved so small they were almost invisible. Patterns that seemed to repeat throughout the different vignettes. That night, as I lay in my sleeping bag, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was coming from the direction of the shelf where I'd placed the box. A soft whisper, barely audible above the sounds of my sleeping bunkmates. I crept out of bed and approached the shelf. The whispering stopped. In the moonlight filtering through the dusty windows, the box looked innocuous enough, but I could swear it felt warmer when I touched it. The next morning brought our first major camp activity, a treasure hunt through the surrounding forest. Each cabin was given a series of clues that would lead them to a hidden prize somewhere in the woods. As we prepared to leave, I made an impulsive decision and slipped the wooden box into my backpack. "Why are you bringing that old thing?" asked Trevor, the comedian of our group. "I don't know," I admitted. I want to figure out how to open it." The treasure hunt took us deep into the pine forest surrounding the camp. The clues were cleverly written, leading us from landmark to landmark. An oddly shaped boulder, a lightning-struck tree, a small creek that ran clear and cold through the underbrush. As we hiked, I found myself falling behind the group, distracted by the weight of the box in my pack and a growing sensation that we were being watched. "David, keep up," Chad called back to me. "We're not waiting if you get lost." I hurried to catch up, But the feeling of being observed persisted. Several times I turned around, expecting to see another camp group following the same trail, but the forest behind us was empty. We'd been hiking for about 2 hours when Kyle made a discovery that changed everything. He was sketching the lightning-struck tree when he noticed something carved into its blackened bark, symbols that matched the ones on my wooden box. "Look at this," he said, calling us over. "These symbols. They're the same ones on David's box. Exactly the same." We gathered around the tree, comparing the carved symbols with those on the box. They were identical, not just similar, but perfectly matched in every detail. "That's impossible," Marcus said. "That box has to be old, but this tree was struck by lightning recently. You can tell by the way the bark has healed." Trevor, always ready with a joke, suggested that maybe the box was magical, like a treasure map or something. Maybe the symbols are directions. It was meant to be funny, but as I held the box up to the tree, something extraordinary happened. The carved symbols on the box began to glow with a soft, warm light, and I heard a distinct click from within the wooden structure. For the first time since I'd found it, the box had a seam. A thin line of light traced around what was now clearly a removable lid. "Holy shit," whispered Tommy. "Did you guys see that?" Chad was suddenly very interested, abandoning his usual detached demeanor to crowd in with the rest of us. "How did you do that, David?" I didn't do anything," I stammered. "I just held it up to the tree." With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in what looked like red velvet, were dozens of small objects: a compass, a whistle, several coins, a small knife, a few photographs, and various other trinkets that looked like they'd been collected over many years. But it was the photographs that made my breath catch. They were old, black and white, but I could clearly make out the faces of children in camp settings. And one of those faces, one of them looked exactly like me. "That's you," Kyle said, voicing what we were all thinking. "That kid in the photo looks exactly like you." I picked up the photograph with shaking hands. The boy in the image was wearing clothes from what looked like the 1950s, but his face was unmistakably mine. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, same slightly crooked smile. He was standing in front of a cabin that looked identical to Cabin 7, surrounded by other boys who bore striking resemblances to my current bunkmates. "It's just a coincidence," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "People can look similar across generations." I reached for another photograph. This one showed a group of boys around a campfire, and again, I could see myself among them. The same face, but in clothing from what appeared to be the 1960s. A third photograph showed the same impossible thing, my face, but in a setting that predated my birth by decades. "This is seriously freaking me out," Trevor said, his usual humor notably absent. Chad grabbed the box from my hands, examining it closely. "This has to be some kind of prank. Maybe it's part of the treasure hunt." But as he spoke, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The other objects in the box, the compass, the whistle, the coins, they weren't random trinkets. They were items I recognized from camp activities. The compass looked identical to the one Chad had shown us during orientation. The whistle was the same model that all the counselors carried. Even the coins matched the ones used in the camp store. More disturbing still, as I watched, new objects began to appear in the box. A pencil that looked just like the one Kyle used for sketching. A lucky rock that Tommy always carried in his pocket. A trading card that Marcus had been showing off earlier that week. "Guys," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think this box is collecting things. Things from us." Kyle reached into his pocket, searching for his sketchbook pencil. His face went pale. "It's gone. My pencil is gone, and now it's in the box." One by one, we checked for our personal items. Tommy's lucky rock, gone. Marcus's trading card, missing. Each item now sat in the velvet-lined interior of the wooden box, as if they'd always been there. "This isn't possible," Chad said, but his voice was shaking. "Boxes don't just collect things." That's when I noticed the new photograph that had appeared on top of the pile. It showed the 6 of us, standing around the lightning-struck tree, holding the open box. But in the photograph, our faces showed expressions of pure terror, emotions far more intense than what we were currently feeling. And in the background, barely visible among the trees, stood a figure I didn't recognize. A tall, thin man in what looked like an old camp uniform watching us with dark, hollow eyes. "We need to get back to camp," I said, snapping the box shut. But as the lid closed, I felt something change. A lightness, as if something important had been taken from me. The hike back to camp passed in tense silence. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what we'd experienced. But as we walked, I began to notice that my memories of the morning were becoming fuzzy. Details that had seemed important were slipping away, leaving only vague impressions and a growing sense of unease. By the time we reached Cabin 7, I could barely remember why we'd gone into the woods in the first place. The wooden box sat in my backpack, feeling heavier with each step. But when I tried to recall how I'd acquired it, or what it contained, my mind came up blank. That night, I opened the box again, alone in my bunk after the others had fallen asleep. The photographs were still there, but they'd changed. Now they showed scenes I couldn't quite remember, myself and my bunkmates in various camp activities. But the details were hazy, dreamlike. It was as if the box was storing not just our possessions, but our memories themselves. Over the following days, the pattern continued. Each morning, I would wake with gaps in my memory from the previous day. Important moments, conversations with friends, letters from home, achievements in camp activities would be reduced to vague impressions. But when I opened the box, I could see evidence of these forgotten experiences preserved in new photographs and objects. The box was growing, fuller, and my life was becoming emptier. My bunkmates were experiencing the same thing, though we rarely talked about it directly. There was an unspoken understanding that something was wrong, but whenever we tried to discuss it, the details would slip away like water through our fingers. We were losing pieces of ourselves, and those pieces were being preserved in the wooden box like specimens in a museum. It wasn't until the final week of camp that I understood the true horror of what was happening. I was alone in the cabin, examining the box for what felt like the 100th time, when I noticed a new compartment that hadn't been there before. Hidden beneath the red velvet lining was a small drawer, and inside that drawer was a leather journal. The journal was filled with entries written in various handwriting styles dating back decades. Each entry told the same basic story: a camper finding the box, discovering its power to preserve memories, and slowly realizing that those preserved memories were being stolen from their minds. The final entry was the most chilling. July 28th, 1987. My name is Robert Chen, and I'm writing this because I know I won't remember it tomorrow. The box has taken almost everything now. My first kiss, my mother's face, the feeling of scoring the winning goal in last year's championship game. All the moments that made me who I am are trapped in here, and I'm becoming an empty shell. But I've figured out its secret. The box doesn't just collect random memories, it's building something. Each camper who finds it contributes their experiences, their emotions, their essence, and slowly over the decades, it's creating a complete person. Someone who has lived every possible camp experience, felt every possible emotion, known every possible joy and sorrow. I think it's trying to create the perfect camper, the ultimate childhood memory. And we're all just raw material for its construction. The entry ended there, but I could see that new words were appearing on the page as I watched, written in my own handwriting, though I wasn't holding a pen. My name is David Martinez, and I found the box in the summer of 2016. I understand now what Robert understood. We're not just losing our memories. We're contributing them to something that's been growing for generations. Every laugh, every friendship, every moment of wonder and discovery is being harvested to create the perfect summer camp experience. But that perfect experience belongs to someone else, something else, and we're being hollowed out to make room for it. I tried to stop writing, but my hand continued to move across the page. I can feel it happening now, the final phase. All our memories, all our experiences from this summer are being compiled into something new. Tomorrow, when our parents come to pick us up, They'll take home children who look like us but are missing everything that made us who we were. We'll be blank slates, and slowly, over the years, the thing in the box will fill us with its artificial memories, its perfect camp, experiences that never really belonged to us. My hand finally stopped moving, and I looked around the cabin with growing horror. My bunkmates were all there, lying in their beds, but something was wrong with them. They were too still, too perfect. Their faces had lost all individual character, becoming generic representations of what camp kids should look like, and then I realized I couldn't remember their names. Tommy, Kyle, Marcus, Trevor, Chad, the identities I'd known them by were fading, replaced by simple labels. The jock, the artist, the rich kid, the comedian, the counselor. I was becoming a character in someone else's story. I tried to run, to escape the cabin and get help, but my body wouldn't obey. Instead, I found myself lying down on my bunk, arranging myself in the same peaceful pose as the others. The box sat on the shelf, glowing softly in the darkness, and I could feel my remaining memories being drawn into it like water into a drain. The last thing I remember is a voice, not heard, but felt directly in my mind, expressing satisfaction at another successful harvest. Another summer's worth of experiences to add to its collection. Another generation of campers to be replaced by hollow shells carrying someone else's perfect childhood. When my parents came to pick me up the next day, they drove home with a son who looked like me, talked like me, even had some of my mannerisms. But the boy they took home had never really lived those 6 weeks at Camp Sunrise. Instead, he carried the artificial memories of dozens of previous campers, all compiled into what something inhuman considered the perfect summer camp experience. The real David Martinez was gone, his authentic experiences preserved forever in a wooden box that was already waiting for the next unsuspecting camper to discover it. I know this because sometimes in dreams, I can still access those stolen memories. I can see the box sitting on its shelf, growing heavier each summer, collecting the essence of childhood itself. And I can feel the thing that took my place, living my life with memories that were never truly mine. The wooden box is still out there, probably in another cabin at another camp, waiting for another curious child to find it and feed its endless hunger for authentic experience. And somewhere, the thing wearing my face is living a life built from the harvested joy of countless stolen summers. Some memories are too perfect to be real, and some summers are too good to be true. It was 1998, and I was 12 years old when my parents sent me to Camp Mohawk, a traditional boys' camp nestled in the pine forests of northern Michigan. The kind of place where they still rang a bell for meals and taught you to carve your initials into walking sticks. My parents thought 6 weeks away from video games and television would build character. They had no idea it would break something inside me that has never healed. Camp Mohawk prided itself on old-fashioned outdoor skills. We learned to tie knots, start fires with flint and steel, identify edible plants, and navigate using map and compass. The camp director, a grizzled ex-Marine named Mr. Peterson, believed that modern kids had gone soft, that we needed to reconnect with the wilderness skills our grandfathers had possessed. I was assigned to Cabin 4, sharing the space with 7 other boys and our counselor Rick, a college sophomore who seemed more interested in his girlfriend back home than supervising a bunch of preteens. The other boys had the usual camp dynamics, the natural leader, the class clown, the quiet kid who kept to himself, the rich kid who complained about everything. I fell somewhere in the middle, trying to find my place without standing out too much. On our 3rd day during orienteering class, something happened that would haunt me for the rest of my life. We were learning to use a compass, practicing basic navigation in a small section of woods behind the dining hall. Mr. Peterson had given each of us a simple military-style compass and explained how to take bearings, follow a course, and find our way back to camp. My compass was different from the others. Where theirs were new, mass-produced models with bright yellow cases, mine was older, brass and steel, with a face that had yellowed with age. The needle was black instead of red, and the cardinal directions were marked with symbols I didn't recognize instead of the usual NSEW. "Where did you get that one?" asked Tommy, the boy from the next bunk over. I shrugged. Mr. Peterson just handed it to me. Said it was a spare. But when I looked around for Mr. Peterson to ask about it, he was nowhere to be seen. Rick was sitting under a tree, writing in what looked like a journal, completely oblivious to our lesson. The other boys were scattered through the small wooded area, practicing their navigation skills, but none of them seemed to have noticed that our instructor had disappeared. The compass felt warm in my hands, almost alive. When I held it flat, the black needle didn't point north like it should have. Instead, it spun slowly, searching before settling on a direction that felt wrong somehow. Not just wrong geographically, but wrong in a way that made my stomach clench, with unnamed dread. I tried to follow the bearing the compass indicated, telling myself it was just a broken instrument. But with each step I took in the direction it pointed, the feeling of wrongness grew stronger. The familiar pine forest around Camp Mohawk began to feel different. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper, the air colder despite the warm July afternoon. After walking for what felt like 10 minutes but couldn't have been more than a few hundred yards, I found myself in a clearing I'd never seen before. This shouldn't have been possible. We'd been given a very small area to practice in, barely a quarter-mile square, and I'd walked in a straight line. But this clearing was unlike anything in the mapped area around camp. The trees surrounding the clearing were wrong. They were the right species, white pine mostly, but they were enormous ancient things that would have taken centuries to grow. And they were arranged in a perfect circle, as if planted deliberately, their branches intertwining overhead to form a natural cathedral. In the center of the clearing stood a single structure, a stone cairn about 4 feet high, made of rocks that were stacked with impossible precision. Each stone fit perfectly with the ones above and below it, and the whole structure seemed to hum with some kind of energy that made the compass in my hands vibrate. I approached the cairn cautiously, every instinct telling me to turn around and run back to camp. But the compass was pulling me forward now, its needle pointing directly at the stack of stones. As I got closer, I could see that the rocks weren't just stacked randomly. They were carved with the same symbols that marked the cardinal directions on my compass. When I reached out to touch the topmost stone, everything changed. The world lurched sideways, like someone had tilted reality at an impossible angle. The real, warm July air became bitter cold, and the afternoon sunlight faded to a dim gray twilight. The pine trees around the clearing stretched impossibly high, their tops disappearing into a sky that was the wrong color. Not quite gray, not quite green, but something that hurt to look at directly. And the silence. The complete, absolute silence that pressed against my eardrums like physical weight. No birds, no wind, no distant sounds of camp activities. Just the soft humming of the cairn and my own ragged breathing. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. I was trapped in that twilight clearing, holding a compass that had brought me somewhere I was never meant to be. And slowly, gradually, I became aware that I wasn't alone. They emerged from behind the ancient trees like shadows given form. Tall, impossibly thin figures in what looked like old military uniforms. Their faces were hidden beneath the brims of campaign hats. But I could feel their attention focused on me with laser intensity. They moved without sound, gliding rather than walking, and as they approached, the temperature dropped even further. The compass in my hands was vibrating so violently now that I could barely hold on to it. The black needle spun wildly, as if trying to find a direction that didn't exist in this place. And then, impossibly, I heard a voice, not spoken aloud, but whispered directly into my mind. "You followed the old paths," the voice said. It was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, but something beyond human categories. "You carry the navigator's burden now." I tried to speak, to ask what they meant, but no sound came from my throat. The figures had formed a circle around me, and I could see now that their uniforms were from different eras. Civil War blue, World War I, olive drab, Vietnam-era camouflage. All of them soldiers, all of them lost. "Every war needs its guides," the voice continued. "Every conflict requires those who can find the paths others cannot see. We served our time. Now it's your turn. The compass grew hot in my hands. So hot. It should have burned my skin, but instead of pain, I felt a strange connection flowing through it. Knowledge that wasn't mine filled my mind. Maps of places that didn't exist. Coordinates to battlefields that had never been fought. Navigation techniques for journeys through dimensions of conflict and suffering. I understood then what the compass truly was. Not a tool for finding your way in the physical world, but an instrument for locating the hidden battlefields that existed in the spaces between reality. Places where wars were fought that had no names, no history books, no memorials. Conflicts that had been raging since the beginning of time, using human souls as soldiers. The camp is a recruitment center, the voice explained as my horror deepened. It always has been. Children are tested, evaluated, selected for their potential. Most are found wanting and sent home with nothing but pleasant memories. But some are chosen for a different kind of service. The figures began to move closer, and I could see beneath the brims of their hats now. Where their faces should have been, there was only darkness. Not empty eye sockets or missing features, but a complete absence that seemed to drink in light and hope and warmth. "You have the gift," they said in unison, their voice now a chorus that echoed inside my skull. "The ability to navigate the impossible places, to guide others through the spaces where reality wears thin. You will serve, as we served. You will lead the lost to their destinations whether they wish to go or not." I tried to drop the compass, but it was fused to my hands now. Its brass surface melted into my palms like molten metal. The pain should have been unbearable, but instead, I felt only a terrible clarity. I could see the paths now, thin lines of light that stretched through the clearing and beyond, connecting this impossible place to countless others. Paths to every war that had ever been fought, every conflict that was yet to come. "Choose," the chorus commanded. "Accept your role willingly and guide with purpose. Refuse and guide anyway, but with the burden of knowing you could have made their journey easier." The clearing began to spin around me, faster and faster, until the ancient trees became a blur of green and brown. The figures faded back into shadow, but their presence remained, watching, waiting for my decision. And through it all, the compass burned in my hands, its black needle now pointing to a destination I couldn't see but somehow knew. The place where I would spend eternity, guiding lost souls to battlefields they'd never chosen to fight on. When the spinning stopped, I was back in the small practice area behind the dining hall. Rick was still writing in his journal. The other boys were still practicing with their compasses, and the sun was still shining through the familiar pine trees of northern Michigan. But everything had changed. The compass in my hands looked normal, again, just a simple brass instrument with a black needle that pointed steadily north. But I could feel its true nature humming beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. And I could see the paths now, faint lines of light that crisscrossed the forest, leading to places that shouldn't exist. Over the next 3 weeks at camp, I learned to live with my burden. The compass never left my side, it couldn't. Attempts to lose it, break it, or give it away always resulted in its mysterious return to my possession. And slowly I began to understand my role. Other campers would come to me with navigation problems during our wilderness exercises. They would joke about being directionally challenged, or born without an internal compass. But I could see their real problem. They were glimpsing the hidden paths, the routes that led to the impossible places, and their minds were rejecting the knowledge. So I would guide them, not always where they wanted to go, but where they needed to be. Away from the thin places in reality, away from the clearings where ancient things waited for fresh recruits. I became the camp's unofficial navigation expert, the kid who could always find his way back, who never got lost no matter how deep into the woods we went. But the price of this ability was the knowledge of what lay beyond the normal world. The compass showed me glimpses of those eternal battlefields, populated by soldiers who had been recruited throughout history for wars that existed outside of time and space. Children who had been chosen for their potential and transformed into guides for the lost, the damned, and the purposeless. On my last night at camp, as I lay in my bunk listening to the other boys sleep, the compass grew warm against my chest where I'd hidden it under my shirt. The black needle began to spin, and I found myself drawn outside following its guidance one last time. It led me back to the practice area, but this time I could see what had always been there. Dozens of thin paths leading in all directions, routes to every camp that had ever existed, connecting them in a vast network of recruitment and selection. And standing at the center of this network was Mr. Peterson, though he looked different now. Older, ancient even. And his eyes held the same terrible darkness I'd seen in the faces of those uniformed figures. "You did well, James," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have existed in human speech. "Better than most. You guided them away from danger, protected their innocence a little longer, but your real work is just beginning." He gestured to the paths spreading out around us, and I could see other figures moving along them, children carrying compasses like mine, leading groups of campers through the darkness between worlds. "Every summer, we recruit new guides," he explained. "Children with the potential to navigate the impossible spaces. Most refuse the calling and live their lives haunted by half-remembered dreams. But some, like you, accept their role and join our ancient service." I wanted to refuse, to throw the compass down and run back to my cabin, but I knew it was too late. The moment I'd touched that cairn, my fate had been sealed. I was part of something now that existed outside normal time and space, a network of guides responsible for steering humanity away from the worst of what waited in the dark. "What about my parents?" I asked. "My life back home?" Mr. Peterson's smile was infinitely sad. "You'll return to them, of course. Finish school, go to college, have a career. But every summer, you'll come back. Not here necessarily, but to camps like this one. And you'll guide the new children away from the paths they're not ready to walk. You'll protect them as others protected you before you were chosen." That was 25 years ago. I've kept my word, returning every summer to different camps across the country. Each time I carry my compass and watch for children who show signs of seeing the hidden paths. Most of the time I'm able to guide them away from danger, to keep them in the safe, normal world where wars are fought by adults and children are allowed to remain innocent. But sometimes, I encounter a child who sees too much, who's drawn too strongly to the impossible places. When that happens, I have to make a choice. Let them stumble blindly into horror, or guide them carefully toward a destiny they're not ready to understand. The compass never leaves my side. Even now, as I tell you this story, I can feel it humming against my chest, its black needle pointing toward paths that lead to tomorrow's conflicts. And I know that somewhere, in a camp much like the one where this all began, another child is reaching for a cairn of ancient stones, about to discover that some directions lead to places you can never truly return from. The worst part isn't the burden of eternal service or the knowledge of what lurks in the spaces between worlds. It's the understanding that this system has been in place for generations, that every camp has its watchers, its recruiters, its ancient network designed to identify and harvest those with the gift. We protect the innocent by sacrificing the gifted. We preserve childhood by stealing it from a chosen few. And we navigate the impossible paths because someone must, because the alternative is chaos beyond imagination. I still guide them, those children who show the signs. I still follow where the compass leads, protecting some and condemning others to a fate I wouldn't wish on anyone, because that's what navigators do. We find the way even when the destination is damnation itself. The compass grows warm as I finish this confession, its needle spinning toward new paths, new children, new choices that will haunt me for another summer. But I'll follow where it leads, as I always have, as I always will, because some directions once taken become the only way forward. My name is Robert, and I need to tell you about the summer I learned that some sounds are meant to be heard by the dead. It was the summer of 2003, and I was 14 when my parents enrolled me in Camp Cedar Ridge, a traditional wilderness camp, in the mountains of Vermont. They were going through a messy divorce that year, and I think they both needed me out of the house while they divided up the wreckage of their marriage. The camp promised to teach leadership skills and outdoor survival, skills they thought I'd need to navigate the broken world they were leaving me. Cedar Ridge was one of those camps that had been operating since the 1940s, with weathered wooden cabins and a main lodge built from massive pine logs. The kind of place where they still raised and lowered the flag every morning and evening, where grace was said before meals, and where the camp director's word was absolute law. Mr. Hammond, the director, was a former military man who ran the camp with precision and discipline that would have made my father proud if he'd been paying attention to anything besides his lawyer's bills. I was assigned to Cabin 8, which I shared with 6 other boys and our counselor Derek, a college junior, who took his authority very seriously. The other boys were a typical mix: athletes, scholars, troublemakers, and quiet kids like me, who were just trying to survive 6 weeks away from home during the worst period of their young lives. On our 4th day, during a wilderness skills workshop, I acquired the object that would change everything. We were learning basic safety procedures, how to signal for help if we got lost in the woods. Each camper was issued a standard survival whistle, the kind with a piercing shriek that could supposedly be heard for miles. But when Derek handed out the whistles, mine was different. Where the others were bright orange plastic with emergency only printed on the side, mine was made of what looked like tarnished silver, with intricate engravings covering its surface. It was heavier than the others, and when I held it up to examine the markings, the metal felt warm despite the cool morning air. "That's an interesting one," said Kevin, the boy from the bunk next to mine. "Looks like an antique." I studied the engravings more closely. They depicted scenes that were hard to make out at first. Figures in what might have been military uniforms, trees that could have been a forest, and symbols that looked almost like musical notes but were arranged in patterns I'd never seen before. "Derek," I called to our counselor, "where did this whistle come from? It's different from the others." Derek looked over from where he was demonstrating proper whistle technique to another group of boys. When he saw what I was holding, his expression changed. Just for a moment, a flicker of something that might have been recognition or fear. That's just an old one from the equipment shed," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Probably been there for years, they all work the same way." But Derek was wrong. This whistle didn't work the same way at all. The first time I blew it during our practice session, the sound it produced was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't the sharp, attention-grabbing shriek of a safety whistle. Instead, it produced a low, mournful note that seemed to echo far longer than physics should have allowed. The sound rolled through the forest around us, bouncing off trees and rocks, creating harmonies that shouldn't have existed. And something answered. From deep in the woods came a response, not an echo, but a different sound entirely. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakably there. A series of low, haunting notes that seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, as if an entire orchestra of unseen musicians were hidden among the trees. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked the other boys in my group. They looked at me blankly. "Hear what?" Kevin asked. The music. The response to my whistle." Derek frowned. "Robert, there's no music. You blew your whistle, it made a sound, and that's it. Maybe you're hearing echoes." But I knew what I'd heard, and as we continued with the lesson, learning proper whistle signals for different emergencies, I noticed something disturbing. Every time I used the silver whistle, the mysterious music would respond, and each time it seemed to be getting closer. That night, lying in my bunk while my cabin mates slept, I took the whistle out from under my pillow and examined it more carefully by flashlight. The engravings were more detailed than I'd first realized. The figures I'd mistaken for soldiers were actually musicians, men and women in various uniforms from different historical periods, all holding instruments. And the symbols I'd thought were musical notes were actually sheet music, complete compositions etched into the silver surface. As I studied the engravings, I began to make out words carved in tiny script around the rim of the whistle. They were in what looked like Latin, but when I sounded them out phonetically, they seemed to form a phrase: "Mortuorum chorus semper audit." The choir of the dead always listens. The translation sent a chill through me, but curiosity overcame caution. I crept out of the cabin, making my way through the quiet camp to the edge of the forest. If something was responding to the whistle, I wanted to understand what it was without waking my bunkmates or attracting Derek's attention. Standing among the tall pines that surrounded the camp, I raised the whistle to my lips and blew a single, long note. The mournful sound drifted through the trees, and almost immediately the response came. Closer now, much closer. It was definitely music, a complex arrangement played by what sounded like a full military band. But there was something wrong with it, something that made my skin crawl. The melody was beautiful but somehow incomplete, as if crucial instruments were missing from the arrangement. And underneath the music, barely audible but unmistakably there, I could hear voices. Human voices, singing along with the instrumental arrangement, but singing words I couldn't understand in harmonies that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. I blew the whistle again, this time trying to match the pitch and rhythm of the response. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The music grew louder, and I could see lights moving through the forest, not flashlights or campfires, but a cold, blue-white glow that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. The lights were moving toward me, and as they drew closer, could make out shapes within the glow. Human figures in military uniforms from different eras, Revolutionary War blue, Civil War gray, World War I olive drab, and others I couldn't identify. They carried instruments, drums, trumpets, flutes, and violins, and they were marching in perfect formation through the dense forest as if the trees and undergrowth didn't exist. At the head of this impossible parade was a figure I recognized from old paintings and history books, a tall man in a Continental Army uniform, carrying a fife that gleamed with the same silver light as my whistle. His face was pale and gaunt, with eyes that reflected the supernatural glow surrounding him, and when he saw me standing at the edge of the camp, he smiled. "Another musician joins our ranks," he said, his voice carrying impossible distance despite being barely above a whisper. "Another soul to complete our eternal performance." I tried to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the ground. The spectral band continued their approach, and I could see now that they weren't just playing music, they were trapped in it. Their movements were mechanical, repetitive, as if they were wind-up toys that had been playing the same composition for centuries. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, though my voice came out as barely a croak. "We are the Lost Band," the fife player replied, still approaching with that terrible, measured pace. "Musicians who died in service to their country, called back to play for eternity. We are incomplete, you see. War has a way of scattering performers, leaving gaps in the arrangement that must be filled." He gestured to his spectral companions, and I could see the truth of his words. There were empty spaces in their formation, missing instruments that created haunting silences in their music. A drummer with no drum, a trumpeter whose instrument had been shattered, a violinist whose strings had snapped and never been replaced. "The whistle chooses our new members," he continued, raising his fife. "It calls to those with musical potential, those who can help us complete the pieces we've been trying to finish since our deaths. You have heard our music, answered our call. Now you must take your place in our eternal concert." The silver whistle in my hand grew hot, so hot it should have burned my fingers, but instead of pain, I felt a strange compulsion to raise it to my lips. The music around me was growing more complex, more beautiful, and I could sense the places where my voice or my whistle would fit perfectly into their arrangement. "What happens if I refuse?" I asked, fighting against the urge to join their supernatural symphony. The fife player's smile became infinitely sad. "There is no refusing, young musician. The whistle has already marked you as one of us. The only choice is whether you come willingly, with the knowledge of what you're joining, or whether you resist until the music claims you anyway." He began to play his fife, and the melody that emerged was heartbreakingly beautiful. It spoke of lost homes, fallen comrades, battles fought for causes that had been forgotten by history. The other ghostly musicians joined in, creating a harmony that seemed to encompass all the tragedy and glory of every war ever fought. And despite my terror, I found myself raising the whistle to my lips. The compulsion was too strong to resist. I was meant to be part of this music, to help these lost souls complete the compositions they'd been working on for decades or centuries. But just as I was about to blow the whistle and seal my fate, a hand grabbed my wrist. "Don't." It was Derek appearing out of the darkness like a guardian angel. "Whatever you do, don't play along with them." The ghostly band stopped their music, turning their attention to my counselor with expressions of surprise and anger. The fife player's face twisted into something inhuman. "You," he hissed. "You who broke faith with us. You who escaped before the symphony was complete." Derek's grip on my wrist tightened. "Run, Robert, get back to the cabin and don't touch that whistle again." But I couldn't move. The confrontation between Derek and the spectral musicians had frozen me in place, and I was beginning to understand something terrible about my counselor. "You were one of them," I whispered. "You were supposed to join their band." Derek nodded grimly, never taking his eyes off the ghostly figures. 5 years ago, when I was a camper here, I found the whistle, heard their music, almost became part of their eternal performance, but someone saved me just like I'm saving you. "Then why are you here?" the fife player demanded. "Why do you return to this place of choosing?" "Because someone has to," Derek replied. "Someone has to warn the new musicians to give them a chance to resist. The cycle has to be broken somehow." The ghostly band began to advance again, their music resuming with a discordant, angry tone. But Derek was pulling me backward, away from the forest and toward the safety of the camp. "The whistle," I gasped. "They said it marked me." "Only if you complete the song," Derek said urgently. "Only if you play along with their final composition. As long as you resist, as long as you don't give in to the music, you can break free." We ran through the camp, the supernatural symphony, following us, growing louder and more insistent with each step. Other campers began to wake, drawn by the impossible music, but they couldn't see the ghostly performers. Only Derek and I could witness the spectral band that marched through the cabins as if they weren't there. Back in cabin 8, Derek helped me barricade the door while the music raged outside. The other boys were awake now, confused and frightened by the sounds they couldn't fully hear or understand. "What's going on?" Kevin demanded. "What's that music?" "Just a storm," Derek lied smoothly. "Sometimes the wind in the trees can sound like music. It'll pass." But the music didn't pass. It continued all night, the ghostly band circling our cabin, playing their incomplete symphonies and calling for me to join them. The silver whistle lay on my bunk, cold and silent now, but I could feel its presence like a weight on my soul. As dawn broke, the music finally faded. The spectral band retreated into the forest, their eternal performance postponed but not abandoned. Derek collapsed into a chair, exhausted by the night-long vigil. "It's not over," he told me quietly. "They'll keep calling to you, trying to complete their symphony. The whistle will keep drawing you to them until you either resist long enough for the connection to weaken, or until you give in and become part of their eternal concert." "How long do I have to resist?" I asked. Derek's expression was grim. "I don't know. I've been fighting it for 5 years, and sometimes I still hear their music in my dreams. Sometimes I wake up with the melody on my lips, ready to whistle along and join them forever. The rest of my time at camp was a waking nightmare. Every night, the ghostly band would return, playing their incomplete compositions and calling for me to take my place among them. The silver whistle remained in my possession. Attempts to lose it, bury it, or throw it away always resulted in its mysterious return to my bunk. Derek became my protector and guide, teaching me meditation techniques to resist the music's call, showing me how to recognize the signs that the spectral musicians were approaching. He'd been fighting the same battle for years, serving as a counselor at the camp not out of love for the outdoors, but because he felt responsible for warning other potential victims. "There's always one," he explained during one of our midnight vigils. "Every summer, the whistle finds a new musician, usually someone who's already dealing with trauma, whose emotional defenses are down. The music offers something that seems like comfort, like belonging, like purpose." "Why don't you just destroy the whistle?" I asked. "I've tried. We all have. But it's not really a physical object anymore. It's a manifestation of their need, their incomplete symphony. Destroying one whistle just causes another to appear. The only way to stop it is to break the cycle somehow. On my last night at camp, the ghostly band made their final, most determined effort to claim me. The music was overwhelming, beautiful, beyond description, and I found myself walking toward the forest despite every conscious effort to resist. The silver whistle was in my hand, raised to my lips when Derek tackled me to the ground. "Fight it, Robert," he shouted over the supernatural symphony. "Think about your life, your future, everything you'll lose if you join them." I thought about my parents, despite their divorce. I thought about my friends back home, about the music I wanted to make with real instruments and living musicians. I thought about all the songs I hadn't written yet, all the performances I hadn't given. And slowly, painfully, I lowered the whistle. The ghostly band's music reached a crescendo of frustration and rage before gradually fading away. The spectral musicians retreated into the forest one last time, their eternal performance still incomplete, still searching for the missing pieces of their supernatural symphony. Derek helped me to my feet, both of us shaking from the encounter. "You did it," he said. "You resisted the final call. The connection should weaken now, though it may never completely disappear." He was right. It's been 20 years since that summer at Camp Cedar Ridge, and I still sometimes hear echoes of their music in my dreams. The silver whistle disappeared from my possession the morning I left camp, but I know it's still out there, waiting for the next young musician whose emotional defenses are down, whose need for belonging makes them vulnerable to the call of the eternal symphony. I never became a professional musician. The experience at camp soured me on making music for years, and by the time I was ready to pick up an instrument again, other paths had claimed my attention. But sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, I hear fragments of those ghostly compositions in my head, beautiful, haunting melodies that were never meant for the living. And I wonder about Derek, still serving as a counselor at camps across the country, still trying to protect children from the supernatural forces that recruit the young and vulnerable, still fighting his own battle against the music that calls to him every night, promising completion, promising belonging, promising an eternity of purpose in service to the dead. The lost band is still out there, still incomplete, still searching for musicians to fill the gaps in their eternal performance. They prey on children at summer camps because that's where young people are most vulnerable, away from home, emotionally exposed, desperate for connection and purpose. If you ever hear mysterious music responding to a whistle call, if you ever find yourself drawn to join a supernatural symphony, remember this: some performances are meant to end and some musicians are meant to remain among the living. The most beautiful music in the world isn't worth an eternity of servitude to forces that see human souls as nothing more than instruments in their endless, incomplete song. The whistle is still out there, still choosing its next victim, still calling to young musicians who don't yet understand that some invitations to join the band should never be accepted.
Thanks for joining me here at Dr. Bonechill. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay safe.